A retired army major, Daniel Harlow, discovers his maid Maria injured and hiding deep fear behind a hastily bandaged arm. As he gently earns her trust, he uncovers the truth. Her abusive brother-in-law has terrorized her and her elderly mother, threatening to return. Driven by a soldier's instinct to protect the vulnerable, Daniel takes Maria and her mother into his home and prepares to confront the danger looming over them. Through storms, fear, and quiet bravery, the story unfolds as Daniel becomes the steadfast shield they never expected, leading to a turning point that changes all their lives. Just after sunrise, when the quiet hum of the ceiling fan still held the last traces of night, retired Army Major Daniel Harlow stepped into his living room and sensed that something in the house had shifted. The air felt heavier, as if holding its breath. Down the hall, he heard a faint sound, a muffled, broken tremor that did not belong to morning routines or household chores. It belonged to pain. And as he followed it, slow and steady, the way he once approached unknown territory, he found Maria standing by the sink, her eyes red, her arm wrapped in a thick white bandage. Maria flinched when she noticed him, trying to hide her bandaged arm behind her apron, but the gesture only deepened the tremor in her shoulders. Daniel had seen that kind of reflex before, in soldiers who tried to swallow their pain, in civilians who feared the consequences of speaking truth. He didn't approach her with questions. He approached with stillness, the way one offers silence before comfort. The morning light filtered through the window, catching on the pale bandage, illuminating the quiet suffering she worked so hard to conceal. Daniel's voice, when it finally came, was low and steady. He asked nothing about work, nothing about tasks left undone. Instead, he asked the question that pulled the last thread from a wound someone had tried to hide. "Who hurt you, Maria?" The words hung between them, fragile yet unyielding. Maria's lips parted, but the confession caught in her throat. She shook her head as though the truth might put someone else in danger. Daniel recognized fear shaped by long shadows. It was the look of someone trapped between survival and silence. He noticed the swelling at her wrist, the way she winced even at the slightest movement. The bandage was wrapped tightly, too tightly, as if done in haste. Whoever had tended to it hadn't cared about comfort, only concealment. Daniel stepped closer, but not enough to startle her, just enough to show he wasn't turning away. The faint scent of antiseptic lingered, mixing incongruously with the aroma of brewing tea. This was supposed to be an ordinary morning. Yet nothing about the moment felt ordinary. It felt like the beginning of a storm. For a brief second, Daniel's mind drifted back to the desert, to nights when the wind carried whispers of danger and every instinct sharpened. That same instinct stirred now. Something unseen was threatening someone under his roof, someone who had never raised her voice or asked for anything beyond her day's wage. Maria had worked for him for almost a year. She moved with quiet efficiency, humming old songs as she cleaned, leaving gentle order in every room she touched. He had never seen her cry. The tears now felt like a confession all on their own. But before she could speak, Maria turned away, gripping the counter with her good hand as though bracing herself against a memory she wished she could forget. Daniel waited. Patience was something the military had carved into him, a discipline shaped by years of listening to the unspoken. Outside, the garden leaves rustled softly, brushing against the window like fingertips urging the moment forward. When she finally whispered, her voice cracked on the edges. "It's nothing, sir. I just fell." The lie was so brittle he could hear it splintering as it left her mouth. Daniel had witnessed countless lies during interrogations, but none cut as sharply as the one spoken out of fear. He stepped beside her, slow enough to give her time to recoil if she needed to, but she didn't move. She only trembled. "A fall doesn't leave marks like that," he said gently. The truth wasn't an accusation, it was an opening. Maria lowered her gaze, tears gathering again, and Daniel saw in her posture the shape of someone exhausted from holding the world together with shaking hands. She whispered, "Please don't ask me. I can't." Silence washed over the room, thick and unmoving. Daniel understood that fear often wrapped itself around the truth like barbed wire. But he also understood the cost of leaving wounds untreated. He took a step back, giving her space, not wanting to corner her with his concern. The kettle clicked off behind them, releasing a faint hiss of steam. It felt like a signal, an interruption that reminded them the world was still turning, even while one of its hearts was breaking. "You're safe here," he said quietly. Whoever hurt you won't cross this threshold without answering to me." Maria's breath shuddered, a fragile sound that echoed more truth than any sentence she'd spoken. The weight of the moment pressed against her, as though every fear she had buried had risen at once. Daniel waited. She wiped her cheeks with the back of her good hand, trembling. "I don't want trouble," she said. It was not a refusal but a plea from someone who had learned that trouble always found the weak first. Daniel saw the hesitation, the conflict, the quiet bravery trying to fight its way through her fear. "Trouble," he said. "Found you already." She looked up then, looked at him, and for the first time Daniel saw a spark of something beneath the fear. Perhaps trust, perhaps desperation, perhaps the faintest hope that someone might finally stand between her and whatever storm had been raging in her life. Outside, a dog barked in the distance, the sound sharp and far away, a reminder that danger didn't always roar. Sometimes it whispered. Daniel straightened his posture, the old military bearing instinctively returning, not as authority but as promise. The story of her wound was not ready to surface, but its shadows were beginning to show. The day had begun, but he could feel the shift in its trajectory. Something fragile had cracked open, and there was no closing it now. Whatever came next, he would face it, because no one under his roof would suffer in silence again. Maria sat at the small kitchen table, her shoulders drawn tight, as if keeping her body small might keep the truth hidden. Daniel moved quietly around the room, giving her space without giving her distance. He had learned long ago that wounded people needed room to breathe but not room to fall. The scent of chamomile tea drifted through the air, soothing in theory but barely reaching the storm inside her. Outside, the morning had fully broken open, sunlight pouring through the windows in pale gold sheets, illuminating everything except the shadows clinging to her expression. She clutched the cup with her uninjured hand, her fingers trembling as though the simple act of holding warmth required more strength than she had left. Daniel watched her without intruding, his posture calm, attentive, the presence of someone used to holding the line for others. In her silence was a story, a long one, threaded with fear and endurance. He did not know it yet, but he could feel its weight pressing the air between them. Sometimes the unsaid was louder than any confession. When she finally spoke, her voice was thin, like something fragile that might break if she pushed too hard. "Sir, I don't want to be a burden." The words sounded rehearsed, as if she had spoken them many times in many places where compassion was scarce. Daniel shook his head slightly, his tone quiet but firm. "You're not a burden, Maria. You're a human being. And someone hurt you." She squeezed her eyes shut, a single tear slipping down her cheek and landing on the table, leaving a tiny dark spot. Her breath shuddered, uneven, as if the truth clawed against her ribs. He waited. Patience was not passive, it was discipline, presence, and promise. After several long seconds, she whispered, "It was my brother-in-law." Her voice trembled around the admission, as though speaking his name without speaking it summoned danger. "He came to our house last night. He was drunk. Angry. He said—" She stopped, swallowing hard. "He said we owed him money. We don't. We never owed him anything. But he—" She lifted her bandaged arm slightly, then let it drop, as if even the memory caused pain. Daniel felt a pulse of anger heat his chest, not the reckless kind, but the controlled, sharpened anger of someone who had seen injustice too many times and refused to look away. He asked softly, "Did he do that to you?" Maria nodded, her chin trembling. "He twisted my arm behind me when I tried to stop him from taking my mother's things. She doesn't have much. Just little things from home. He wanted to sell them." Her voice cracked again. "I tried to stop him. He said I should know my place." Daniel's jaw tightened, but he kept his tone steady. Rage wouldn't help her, not the kind that scared the wounded more than their oppressors. He needed her to feel safe, not overwhelmed. "Where is your mother now?" he asked. "At home. She's scared. He said he would come back tonight." The fear in Maria's eyes deepened, filling them like rising water. "I didn't know what to do. I wanted to come to work. I needed the money. But I didn't want you to see." She looked down at her bandage as though it betrayed her. Daniel leaned forward slightly, his voice low, grounded. "Maria, listen to me. No one should be afraid in their own home. And no one should face a man like that alone." She wiped her eyes again, this time faster, almost apologetically. I didn't want to involve you. You've been kind to me. I didn't want trouble following me here. I thought if I just kept quiet, maybe he would leave us alone." Daniel had heard that belief before. It was the anthem of the abused, the hope that silence could calm the storm. "People like him," Daniel said softly, "don't stop because you stay quiet. They stop when someone stands up to them." She looked up, startled, as if unfamiliar with the idea that someone might stand for her instead of against her. The fragile hope Daniel had glimpsed earlier flickered again, faint but real. "But he's dangerous," she whispered. "He has friends. He thinks he owns everything he touches." Daniel nodded slowly. "I've met men like him. They rely on fear. And they crumble when the fear stops working." A quiet fell between them again, but now it was different, less heavy with secrecy, and more like a space waiting to be filled with the next step. Maria took a shaky sip of tea, then placed the cup down with deliberate care, as if returning control to her hands one small action at a time. "I don't want him near my mother," she said softly. "She's all I have." Daniel felt something settle in him, a decision forming with the solid weight of certainty. "Then he won't get near her," he said. "Not tonight. Not ever again." Maria shook her head quickly, panic flickering. "No, sir, please. If you confront him, he'll only get angrier. He'll come after you. After us." Daniel's expression didn't change, but his voice grew even calmer, the way it did when danger was close and clarity mattered more than fear. "Maria, I've dealt with men who were far more dangerous than a drunk with an ego. I'm not going to escalate anything recklessly. But I won't let him hurt you again." She looked at him for a long moment, her eyes searching his face for something. Doubt, hesitation, uncertainty. She found none. What she found instead was the quiet, steady resolve of a man who had spent a lifetime standing between chaos and the innocent. It unsettled her and steadied her all at once. Finally, with a trembling breath, she whispered, What are you going to do?" Daniel didn't answer immediately. Outside, a breeze brushed through the open window, carrying the faint sound of distant traffic and the rustling of leaves, mundane noises that made the moment feel even more fragile. At last he spoke, the words simple, certain, and heavy with promise. "First," he said, "I'm going to make sure you and your mother are safe." He stood slowly, his movements controlled, decisive. "And then," he added, meeting her eyes, "I'm going to pay your home a visit." The sun dipped lower in the sky as afternoon stretched toward evening, casting long amber beams through the living-room windows. Daniel stood at the center of the quiet house, the weight of Maria's confession still echoing in every corner. He had faced insurgents, warlords, chaos wearing a dozen different faces, but somehow the idea of a man hurting a young woman and an elderly mother in their own home struck him deeper than any battlefield memory. It wasn't the scale of the threat, it was the cowardice behind it. Violence against the defenseless was a language he had spent his life trying to silence. Maria sat on the sofa, her hands clasped together so tightly that her knuckles whitened. She watched him pace, though his steps were steady rather than anxious. He was thinking, mapping something in his mind the way he used to map terrain before entering hostile territory. But this time, the landscape was smaller, a modest home in a crowded neighborhood, and the enemy, if he could even be called that, was a single man fueled by alcohol, arrogance, and entitlement. Yet Daniel understood something she didn't. Danger didn't require sophistication. It only required opportunity. He stopped pacing and turned toward her. "I'm going with you," he said. "To your home. We're going to make sure your mother is safe." Maria shook her head immediately, fear tightening her breath. "He might be there. He might have come back already." Daniel nodded. "Good. Then I'll see him for myself." His calmness unsettled her, because she mistook it for underestimation. But Daniel never underestimated anyone. Calm was his armor, and intention his weapon. Maria tried again, her voice trembling. "Sir, he doesn't care who he hurts when he's drunk. He thinks no one can stop him." "If he sees you," Daniel interrupted gently. "Maria, I don't walk into situations unprepared. And I don't walk into them to escalate. I walk into them to end harm. That's all." She swallowed hard, tears threatening again, but this time they carried something different, relief tangled with fear, hope mixed with dread. He retrieved his keys, then paused and looked at her arm. We should get that checked before we go. She shook her head quickly. Not yet. We need to check on my mother first. She must be so scared. She doesn't know if he'll come back. The desperation in her voice made Daniel nod without hesitation. Then we go now. Outside, the late afternoon breeze carried the scent of rain, though the sky was still clear. Daniel opened the passenger door for Maria before circling to the driver's side. She sat stiffly, clutching her injured arm as the car started. The drive felt longer than it was. Every street they passed heavy with the unspoken tension between them. Daniel kept his eyes on the road, but he sensed her fear in every small breath she took. He didn't try to soothe her with platitudes. Words meant little until action gave them weight. Maria's neighborhood was a patchwork of aging buildings, narrow streets, and the dim glow of old street lamps that flickered even before dusk. Her home was a small, single-story structure with peeling paint and a rusted gate. As Daniel pulled up, he immediately took in the details: the bent latch on the gate, the shoe marks on the dirt path, the slightly ajar front door. Maria gasped softly, her hand flying to her mouth. "I closed the door this morning," she whispered. "I'm sure I did." Daniel cut the engine, his entire posture shifting with military precision. "Stay behind me," he said calmly, "and stay outside until I tell you otherwise." Panic filled her eyes. "My mother, I'll get to her," he assured. His tone wasn't harsh. It was structured, steady, the voice of a man who had walked into danger far too many times to treat it carelessly. He approached the door silently, scanning for signs, scratches, forced entry, footprints, anything. There was no sign of a break-in, but the silence inside felt wrong. Houses weren't supposed to feel hollow unless something had emptied them. Daniel pushed the door open, calling softly, "Ma'am?" "It's Daniel, Maria's employer." "Are you all right?" No answer. He stepped inside. The living room was small and dim, the curtains partially drawn. A chair lay tipped over near the corner. A ceramic cup had shattered near the wall. Daniel felt a mild rush of adrenaline, not panic, but readiness. He moved deeper inside, stepping over the broken cup without sound. "Ma'am," he called again. A soft whimper answered from the back bedroom. Daniel followed it, pushing the half-closed door wider. Inside, an elderly woman sat on the floor, leaning against the bed, her hands shaking. Relief flooded her eyes when she saw him. "He came back," she whispered. "He said he'd return tonight again. I didn't know what to do." Daniel crouched beside her. "You're safe now. Maria is here." He glanced back toward the front door, where Maria hovered anxiously. "Come in," he called. The moment Maria saw her mother, she fell to her knees, gathering the trembling woman into a careful embrace with her good arm. Her mother cried, not loudly, but with the quiet devastation of someone who had been terrified for far too long. Daniel stood, giving them space. But his attention remained on the doorway, his senses alert. "Is he still around?" he asked softly. Maria's mother shook her head. "He left. Said he'd come back after drinking more." Daniel exhaled, not in relief, but in calculation. He turned to Maria. "Pack what you need for tonight. Both of you are coming with me." Maria's eyes widened. "We can't leave. If he comes back and sees us gone—" "Good," Daniel replied. "Then he'll know he no longer controls you. And he won't face your fear. He'll face me." She swallowed hard. "Sir, what are you planning?" Daniel looked toward the door, then back at the two women trembling in the quiet room. His voice was steady, deliberate. "I'm going to make this stop, not just tonight, not just for now. Permanently." A chill ran through Maria, not because she feared what Daniel would do, but because she sensed something shifting, like a truth rising from beneath calm waters. The Major wasn't improvising. He wasn't reacting. He was preparing. And somewhere far off, thunder finally rumbled across the horizon, as though the sky itself foreshadowed the confrontation to come. Night fell with a slow, deliberate weight, settling over the neighborhood like a heavy curtain. Clouds drifted across the sky, dimming the moonlight and casting long, shifting shadows across the narrow street. Daniel stood outside his home after bringing Maria and her mother safely inside, watching the dark settle in as though he were reading it, assessing its movements, anticipating what it intended to hide. The air was thick with the metallic scent of the coming rain, but beneath it lay something sharper: tension, expectation, the sense that something was making its way toward them. He could feel it. Danger had its own gravity. Inside, Maria sat with her mother on the sofa, both wrapped in blankets Daniel had brought from the linen closet. Though his home was humble, it was secure. Locks reinforced, windows sturdy, alarm systems intact. He had installed those things years ago out of old habit rather than expectation, but tonight they seemed prophetic. The two women huddled close together, their fear palpable even behind the safety of the locked door. Maria's mother trembled each time a car passed outside, each time a dog barked in the distance. Trauma lived not in the moment of harm, but in the echo of it. Daniel stepped back inside, his posture calm yet alert. He looked at them with the steady reassurance of someone who had seen far worse storms than this and survived every one. "He won't get near you," he said quietly. "Not here." Maria tried to smile, but it faltered. "You don't know him," she whispered. "He's unpredictable. He doesn't think about consequences. He acts before he thinks." Daniel nodded. People like him rely on intimidation. But intimidation only works when no one stands against it. He checked the windows again, not out of uncertainty, but out of disciplined thoroughness. Old instincts guided him: verify, anticipate, prepare. Even after retirement, those habits remained stitched into his bones. As he moved, Maria watched him, noticing for the first time the difference in the way he carried himself tonight. He wasn't merely concerned. He was ready. And that readiness held its own quiet power. Outside, thunder rumbled again, closer this time. The wind picked up, nudging the branches of the trees against the side of the house. Maria's mother flinched at every sound, but Daniel remained centered, still as a man rooted to purpose. He turned off all but one lamp in the living room, bathing the house in soft amber light. Dimness offered control. Darkness offered clarity. Too much brightness left people exposed. He moved to the hallway and retrieved something from a wooden chest, an object wrapped in cloth. Maria felt her pulse quicken. "What is that?" she asked, her voice tight. Daniel unfolded the cloth slowly, revealing a worn but meticulously maintained combat flashlight. Not a weapon, just a tool. Heavy, metal, unyielding, reliable. Maria exhaled shakily, partly relieved, partly unnerved by the quiet deliberateness of his preparation. "I won't use it unless I need to," Daniel said. "But I won't give him any advantage." The room fell into a tense stillness. Only the ticking clock on the wall dared to move. Maria's mother whispered, "He'll come. He said he would. He doesn't let things go." Daniel didn't respond. He didn't need to. The way he positioned himself near the front window, his silhouette steady against the dim glow, was answer enough. He was ready for whatever would arrive. Minutes stretched into an hour. Rain began to fall, first gently, then harder, drumming against the roof in a relentless rhythm. The storm outside seemed to thicken the air within the house. Maria sat rigid, staring at the door as though expecting it to burst open at any moment. Daniel remained near the window, his gaze scanning the street with the precise, unhurried vigilance of a soldier on watch. Then, at last, headlights crawled slowly down the road. Daniel felt it before he saw it, the shift in the atmosphere, the tightening of the moment. A beat later, a small, dented car rolled to a stop directly across the street. The engine idled unevenly. Music boomed faintly from inside. Even from the shadowed window, Daniel could see the silhouette of a man slumped over the wheel, his movements erratic. Maria's breath caught. "It's him," she whispered, gripping her mother's hand. Her voice broke around the words, trembling with old fear pushing its way into the present. Daniel's expression didn't change. But the room itself felt like it exhaled, tense, bracing, ready. The man stumbled out of the car, swaying. Even from across the street, Daniel could smell the alcohol on the air drifting in through the smallest window crack. The brother-in-law staggered toward the gate, muttering to himself, rage simmering under the slurred growl of his voice. "Where is she?" he yelled into the storm. "Where are they hiding?" His words sliced through the rain, ugly and erratic. Maria's mother whimpered, burying her face in her hands. Maria froze, dread locking her in place. Daniel stepped forward, his voice steady as bedrock. "Stay here," he said softly. "Do not open the door for anyone but me." Maria grabbed his sleeve before he could turn fully away. "Please, be careful. He's dangerous." Daniel looked at her, the softest shift crossing his gaze. "So am I," he said quietly, though no threat touched his tone, only truth. He stepped out into the rain. The storm swallowed him instantly, raindrops pounding against his shoulders, wind tugging at his clothes. The brother-in-law stumbled up the walkway, banging on the gate, yelling incoherent threats. But when he saw Daniel approaching, something shifted, confusion first, then indignation, then a crude attempt at intimidation. "Who the hell are you?" he slurred, pointing an unsteady finger. Daniel stopped a few feet away, rain sliding down his face, his voice calm and low. "I'm the man who's going to make sure you never lay a hand on them again." The drunk man barked a laugh, though it cracked with uncertainty. "You think you can stop me? You don't know what's yours to stay out of." Daniel didn't raise his voice. He didn't move closer. He simply stood, solid as a wall, letting the storm speak around him. "Hurting women isn't your right," he said. "Threatening families isn't your right. And your control ended the moment you laid a hand on her." The man's face twisted, anger spiking, not because of Daniel's words, but because of the truth they carried. He lurched forward, fist swinging, not coordinated, not calculated, just a wild strike fueled by ego. But Daniel moved with quiet precision, stepping aside and catching the man's wrist before the blow could land. Not violently, not aggressively, controlled, firm. The man snarled, struggling, but Daniel held him with steady, immovable strength. "This ends tonight," Daniel said softly. The brother-in-law stumbled, lost his balance, and collapsed onto the wet pavement, cursing, sputtering, unable to rise. Sirens sounded in the distance. Daniel had called earlier, anticipating the moment. As the flashing lights grew closer, Daniel didn't look triumphant. He looked tired, resolved, human. When the police arrived, soaked and urgent, Daniel stepped back, letting them take control. The man was handcuffed, yelling slurred insults that scattered uselessly into the storm. But none of them reached Daniel. None of them reached the house where Maria and her mother waited, trembling with the weight of their fear and their hope. As the patrol car pulled away, Daniel stood alone in the rain, letting the storm wash over him. Behind him, the front door opened quietly. Maria stepped out, tears mingling with the rain on her face. "Is it over?" she whispered. Daniel turned toward her, the storm behind him, the warm glow of the house beside her. "Yes," he said gently. "Tonight. It's over." But the deeper healing, that part had yet to begin. Morning arrived quietly, as though unsure whether it should disturb the fragile calm that had settled over the house. Soft light spilled through the windows, brushing gently against the worn furniture, the framed photographs, the blankets draped across the sofa where Maria and her mother had finally fallen asleep after a night that felt both endless and life-altering. The storm had passed, leaving the world washed clean, but healing, real healing, still lingered on the horizon like a distant promise. Daniel stood in the kitchen, leaning against the counter with a cup of coffee cooling in his hands. He wasn't looking out the window or studying the room. He was simply listening. The quiet meant safety now, not fear. It meant breath instead of dread. A small shift, but a profound one. After years in uniform, he had learned to measure peace not by silence, but by what silence contained. When Maria stirred awake, she blinked groggily, her gaze darting around the unfamiliar room before memory settled over her. She sat up slowly, her injured arm resting gently in her lap. Across from her, her mother remained asleep, her breathing slow and steady for the first time in days. The sight made Maria's eyes fill with tears, not of fear, but of relief so deep it felt like a release from something that had lived beneath her ribs for years. Daniel stepped into the living room, his presence quiet but grounding. "Morning," he said softly. Maria looked up at him, her expression shifting between gratitude and exhaustion. "Did you sleep?" she asked. He nodded. "A little. Enough." He didn't mention the hours he had spent in the hallway chair, listening for any shift in the night air, for anything that might threaten the fragile safety he had restored. He didn't need to. For a long moment, they simply existed in the stillness, the air warm with unspoken truths. Then Maria's mother woke, blinking sleep from her eyes before recognition brought tears welling beneath them. "Is he gone?" she whispered. Daniel nodded gently. "He's in custody. The charges will hold." The older woman pressed a trembling hand to her chest, murmuring a silent prayer of gratitude. Maria wiped her eyes discreetly, but Daniel saw the tremor in her hand. "You don't have to be strong right now," he said quietly. "Not after everything you've endured." She shook her head, her voice barely a whisper. "I'm not strong. I was terrified." Daniel crouched in front of her, meeting her gaze with the calm steadiness she had grown to trust. "Being afraid doesn't mean you're not strong. Courage is what you do in spite of fear, not in the absence of it." Her breath shuddered, the weight of his words settling somewhere deep within her. "I thought no one would help us," she admitted. "I thought we were alone." Daniel's jaw tightened, not in anger, but in sorrow for the world that had taught her such a thing. "You're not alone," he said. "Not anymore." He stood and moved to a small drawer in the hallway, pulling out a first-aid kit. "Let me rewrap your arm," he said. Maria hesitated only a moment before offering it to him. As he unwound the old bandage, she winced softly, but there was trust in the way she held still. Daniel worked slowly, meticulously, with hands that had patched up soldiers on battlefield ridges and rescued civilians in collapsing villages. Now those same hands tended to a maid who had endured more than anyone ever should. "You know," Maria said softly, watching him work, "you didn't have to do any of this." Daniel looked up, his expression steady. "Yes," he said, "I did." There was no heroism in his voice, no need for praise. The truth was simple. When a person was hurting, you helped. It was the foundation he had built his life on long before he ever wore a uniform. When he finished wrapping her arm, he sat back slightly. Maria studied him with quiet curiosity. "Why did you help us?" she asked. "You don't even know us." Daniel took a slow breath, his gaze drifting briefly to the window where sunlight shimmered across the glass. "Because once," he said softly, "I watched someone suffer when help could have made all the difference. And I vowed I would never stand by again." He didn't elaborate, but the weight of his past lingered like a faint shadow behind his words. Maria nodded slowly, as though she understood something unspoken. Her mother reached over and took her hand, squeezing it with gentle affirmation. The three of them sat there for several minutes, letting the morning settle into their bones. Eventually, Daniel stood. "There will be paperwork," he said gently. "Statements. Court dates. But you won't face any of it alone." Maria looked up sharply. "You'll come with us?" Daniel's expression softened. "If you want me to." A soft smile flickered through her tears. "We do," she said. Later that morning, after breakfast and after ensuring Maria's mother was comfortable, Daniel drove them to the station to give their statements. The officers greeted him with respectful familiarity. His service record carried weight even in civilian life, but he deflected every mention of his rank, refusing anything that edged toward glory. This wasn't about him. It was about two women finding their voices again. Inside the station, Maria's voice trembled at first, but as she spoke, slowly, carefully, something changed. The fear didn't vanish, but it loosened, releasing its grip one breath at a time. Her mother found her strength as well, offering details with a steadying firmness born of years surviving in silence. When they finished, Daniel guided them out, the sun warm on their shoulders as if congratulating them for speaking truth aloud. Back at Daniel's home, Maria paused on the walkway, turning to him with emotion shining in her eyes. "I don't know how to thank you," she whispered. "There aren't words." Daniel shook his head. "You don't owe me gratitude. You owe yourself freedom." Tears slipped down her cheeks, quiet, cleansing, hopeful. "I never thought someone would stand up for us," she said. "I never thought someone would care enough." Daniel looked at her then, really looked, seeing not a maid but a woman who had endured fear, protected her mother, and survived a night that could have destroyed her. "Sometimes," he said softly, "people just need one person to say, 'Enough.' One person to stand with them so they can stand on their own." Maria nodded, emotion folding her shoulders before lifting them again with new strength. "You were that person," she murmured. "You changed everything." Daniel's voice softened, almost a whisper. "No. You changed everything when you chose to speak." She took a deep, steady breath, her first breath of a future no longer ruled by fear. Her mother stepped beside her, resting a gentle hand on her back. The morning sun framed them both in warm gold, casting long, soft shadows that spoke not of danger but of resilience. Daniel watched them, a quiet pride filling him, not pride for himself but for them. The storm had broken. The danger had passed. And now, like a landscape washed clean, they could rebuild. Maria looked back at him once more, her voice trembling with sincerity. "We'll never forget this." Daniel nodded, the faintest smile touching his lips. "Just live safely. That's all the thanks I need." As they stepped inside, the door closing softly behind them, Daniel lingered for a moment in the quiet morning air. The world was still, calm, full of possibility. And he realized something. Sometimes the battles that matter most aren't fought in deserts or war zones. They're fought in living rooms, on doorsteps, in the hearts of people who believe they're alone. And sometimes, all it takes to win them is one act of courage, one stand, offered at the exact moment it's needed most.